watch Governor Wolf's 2021-2022 charter reform and basic education funding proposal.
Our next presentation is a charter school update, and we have Miss Meredith Brett from PFM Consulting Group, who will share some numbers specific to the Harrisburg School District around the governor's budget proposal and reform of cyber and charter school funding. So, Miss Brett, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Dr. Samuels and Mr. Celmer and the board for inviting me to come and speak with you tonight. As Mr. Celmer said, I want to sort of go through a brief analysis that we conducted regarding the specific impact to the Harrisburg School District from the charter tuition reform proposal in the 2021 budget proposed by Governor Wolf. So next slide, please. Thank you. So earlier this year, Governor Wolf proposed a charter reform package as part of the 21-22 budget. And what that proposal is calling for is adjustments for how both regular and special education charter tuition rates are calculated. So the way it currently is funded, each district has their own charter tuition rate for both regular ed and special ed. And the way it's built out for every district is based on their total amount of expenditures and a set number of deductions. I'm going to speak in sort of broad terms, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end. The governor's proposal is calling for increasing the number of deductions for regular ed brick and mortar schools. It's calling for setting a standard statewide tuition rate of $9,500 for regular education cyber schools. And on the special education side, the proposal is calling for a change from the single blended rate that all special education students receive now, regardless of need. This proposal calls for setting 3 different tuition rates. So also listed here on the slide, proposal also calls for some increased oversight and accountability of charter schools here, including a moratorium on new charter schools opening in the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. So the amount that district spends on charters is a function of both enrollment and these charter tuition rates. So before we talk about the change in the tuition rates, I just wanted to talk briefly about enrollment. So the first table that you see here, the historical charter enrollment, this is specific to the Harrisburg School District. And as you can see, total charter enrollment has gone from about 800 kids in 2016-17 to 1,244 as of the current year. That's an average through April of 2021. You'll see most of that growth has been in the last year. Obviously, you all know with the pandemic, and you'll see most of that growth is in cyber students. So in the last year, the district's charter enrollments increased by 266 students, which is 27.2%. So what you see in the table below is what the current projected enrollment for the Harrisburg School District looks like. What you see with projecting most of this growth is the opening of the PA STEAM brick and mortar charter school that's scheduled to open this fall. This is a brick and mortar charter school starting with grades K through 2 and expanding over the next few years. Unlike most of the pre-existing brick and mortar schools in the district, this one is going to take some time to hit their caps. And so what you see here is the projected growth growing to about 1,600, almost 1,700 students by 25-26. Next slide, please. So looking at these charter tuition rates, again, I sort of want to keep this, relatively high level. The first thing is, as I said, charter tuition rates are specific to each district, and every district calculates them based on their own expenditures, their own deductions, filling out the 363 form, et cetera. Mr. Longridge and Mr. Celmer know well. So what we've done here is pull out the charter tuition rates that the Harrisburg School District has had from over the last 5 years. And as you can see for 2021, you're spending about $11,200 per regular education student and almost $32,000 for every single special education student that attends a charter. And actually, Harrisburg has the highest special education tuition rate of all of the districts in Dauphin County. And looking at what the adjustment in the tuition rates would be from the governor's proposal, you would be saving an estimated little over $1,000 per student next year for a regular education student and $13,500 for each special education student under the proposal. And again, the sort of the differences in the calculation are adding in certain deductions and applying sort of a tiered system to special education, where the lowest level service would get a lower rate, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So I'm sorry. I think we might be frozen on the slide. Think one more. Thank you very much. So here we see what the combined impact of the projected growth is and your charter tuition rates. So here in the baseline charter tuition table at the top, this is what your current charter tuition rates look like, along with that projected growth that we showed, showing charter enrollment growing to about 1,700 kids. Over the course of that period, you would be spending by 25-26, $28.1 million annually on charter tuition. That's almost $10 million above where you project you'd be spending it next year. Under the governor's reform, the charter reform proposal that you see sort of at the bottom, this also assumes the increases in enrollment. So it's the same 1,700 kids that you'd see enrolled. But as you can see, the annual savings and the difference down at the bottom are what you would be saving each year. So in 21-22, you'd be saving $4.1 million, and so on and so forth until 25-26, when you would be saving $6.5 million a year under that proposal. I will say, just to caveat it here, because this proposal has not been adopted, there were some assumptions we had to make over the course of the analysis. So if this proposal was to be adopted and approved by the legislature, it's very likely that the numbers would shift slightly. So we don't want you to take this as an exact calculation, but we do think it's important to show here how significant the savings would be for a district like Harrisburg. And I know, Mr. Celmer, you and I talked, I would sort of give you an opportunity to jump in. I think this is probably the right spot, since I know there's a lot to say here.
Okay. First, thank you, Ms. Brett, and thank you to PFM for this analysis, because it is important that our community sees the impact of the proposed changes that the governor has put forth. And for us here in Harrisburg, as our community knows from the May and June budget meetings, we're projecting a little bit over $5 million structural deficit. We're not going to have a deficit because of ESSER funding covering that gap. But when you see this proposal, essentially, this would give us structural budget balance, or very close to it, if this proposal would go over the finish line. And then you look at how it projects out year after year, and this assumes that we do nothing as a school district. This doesn't assume all the initiatives with our HVLA that you'll hear about in a few minutes, our initiatives that we want our students back with the Harrisburg School District. It doesn't assume any positivity financially and for our students by them coming back into our programming. So you can see, just by this proposal in its current state, making it over the finish line in the next 9 days, what it could mean for the Harrisburg School District moving forward. It is significant. And again, this just levels the funding field, because Ms. Brett showed under special education funding is where the largest disparity is. Because if you're a cyber charter, you almost get credit financially for a student that if they had a tier 2 or tier 3 type of special education support that they needed, which is much more costly. This evens that and attributes the cost to the type of needs a student may have, which is how, as a school district, we are funded for our special education students. So again, this is something that is more than fair, more than reasonable, and put politics to the side. This should not have a tough time, honestly, moving into legislation if it wasn't for the politics in between. But again, Ms. Brett, I just want to, thank you for this detailed analysis and putting the numbers to the messaging that we've been sharing for months with our community here in Harrisburg regarding how important this particular issue is for the sustainability and the future of the Harrisburg School District.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Samuels, one more, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ms. Brett, one more slide.
No, this is essentially the same information, just in graph form. It just shows the difference in the amount that you would be paying in charter tuition under the two different proposals each year. And of course, this will be available on board docs if anybody wants to take a look at it.
Okay. Dr. Samuels?
Yes, I too like to join Mr. Celmer in saying thank you, Ms. Brett, to you and Ms. Lee, Mr. Kaplan, for all the supports. Thank you in particular for doing this presentation and for sharing. And I think as we attempt to be as transparent as possible, it just reinforces and really put forth the information that we'd like for everyone to know and understand, especially as it impacts the Harrisburg School District. Thank you so very much, Ms. Brett. And thank you for all of your hard work.
Well, thank you.
The other initiative that the governor has proposed is to send over $1 billion into the basic education funding formula. And the charter school advocacy that we just spoke of and Ms. Brett went over the numbers on, that would help us cover structurally to have a balanced budget. What this proposal does is offers generational change for school districts like Harrisburg, Allentown, et cetera, that have been historically underfunded for the last 2 to 3 decades, if not longer. If you look at the middle of the page, based on Harrisburg School District, our current basic ed funding that we receive from the state of Pennsylvania, thank you, Mr. Nornhold, is $53,792,273. Under the proposal from the governor, our basic ed funding would increase to over almost $90 million, $36 million every year, reoccurring revenue into the Harrisburg School District. This is a generational investment into education that if this made it over the finish line, so to speak. So the charter school reform would certainly help us short term with budgetary constraints. This changes the narrative for the future of our students in the Harrisburg School District. And we've been saying as a team that our issues are cyber charter school expense, and revenue not growing and expenses outpacing. This would absolutely provide us the ability to completely look at the way we educate, how we attract our staff, how we apply our resources with this reoccurring increase in revenue. So again, hopefully seeing this tonight, call your legislators, advocate for our school district, because this is the type of legislation that truly needs to happen to move school districts like Harrisburg forward and try and make up for the errors of the past regarding the lack of financial reoccurring resources into the school district. And I just want to make one other comment before we move on. Some people may say, well, you just received $80 million in ESSER funding, and we are so appreciative of those dollars. They are one-time dollars. This chart is reoccurring every year revenue for the students and the families in the Harrisburg School District. And this, again, could be a game changer moving forward.